They threatened a 300% tax on the lifeblood of the modern world. Take a listen.
Particularly in the very near future, we're going to be placing tariffs on foreign production of computer chips, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals to return production of these essential goods to the United States of America. They left us and they went to Taiwan, which is about 98% of the chip business, by the way. And we want them to come back, and we don't want to give them billions of dollars like this ridiculous program that Biden has. Give everybody billions of dollars. They already have billions of dollars. They've got nothing but money, Joe.
For the small island that controls it, this wasn't a trade war. It was a siege on their sovereignty. And their response is now a blueprint for every nation facing a superpower's ultimatum. Chips are the brains of everything that moves, thinks, or launches. We are talking about tanks, phones, AI, power grids. And one small island, Taiwan, sits at the center of that web. So when Donald Trump turned his tariff machine toward chips, this wasn't just another trade skirmish. It was an attempt to grab the steering wheel of the world's most strategic industry. Washington came in with a master's ultimatum. Taipei answered with a strategist's playbook. And step by step, the tariffs meant to force obedience ended up teaching everyone how to disarm economic coercion. It starts in January and February 2025. The Trump administration signals it's ready to go far beyond a blanket 10% tariff on almost all imports. Officials float semiconductor-specific duties that could go as high as 300% on imported chips, with a clear escape hatch. Companies that commit to building fabrication plants in the United States could be exempted or softened. In other words, relocate your production to America, or watch your lifeblood get taxed into oblivion. Take a listen.
We'll be putting a tariff on of approximately 100% on chips and semiconductors. But if you're building in the United States of America, there's no charge, even though you're building and you're not producing yet in terms of the big numbers of jobs and all of the things that you're building.
At the same time, Taiwan semiconductor manufacturing company TSMC confirms its Arizona fabs are moving forward. But it makes something else equally clear. It is not relocating half its production. The Arizona projects are an expansion, not a surrender of Taiwan's core manufacturing base. In March, the pressure escalates. White House figures start talking publicly about a 50-50 vision. They want half of the chips serving U.S. demand should eventually be made on U.S. soil. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick describes a world where, in his words, we're producing half, you're producing half.
We need enough production. So the idea that I pitched them was, let's get to 50-50. We're producing half, and you're producing half. We're still fundamentally reliant upon you because, we can't live without the other half. But if we have half, we have the capacity to do what we need to do if we need to do it. So that's our thinking, and that has been the conversation we've had with Taiwan, that you have to understand it's vital for you to have us produce 50%. And that conversation, now you can imagine when someone has 95%, convincing them that they should only have 50%. That's a lot of talking. But you can tell already, just from these couple of minutes, I'm not really shy about talking. And that's what we've been working on.
The implication lands quickly in Taipei. If you want defense, market access, and tariff exemptions, move half your crown jewels into our jurisdiction. Taiwan's response is, however, blunt. Government officials go on record saying they have never agreed to move 50% of production and calling the idea unrealistic. They underline that they are negotiating directly with Washington, not in some joint package with South Korea. It's a message on two levels. The relocation quota itself is off the table. And Taiwan is not a sidekick in someone else's regional plan. In April, the hard link between tariffs and security sets in. Threats of triple-digit semiconductor tariffs intensify. Then reporting makes clear that chip talks are being discussed in the same breath as defense cooperation and arms sales. Advanced systems like the F-35 join the background noise, with software partitions, training schedules, and qualitative edge constraints all swirling around the same table as tariff exemptions and chip relocation. Analysts warn that Taiwan is being squeezed between U.S. demands on one side and Chinese military pressure on the other, with little room for hedging. In May and June, the picture changes shape. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company announces further progress on its Arizona expansion as part of a broader U.S. investment framework. This is often described in public as potentially reaching around $160+ billion over time. But in every technical briefing and press interaction, one point stays constant. The majority of its production, especially the most advanced nodes, will remain in Taiwan. This is playing out well as Taipei builds friction into the process. Rather than agreeing to sweeping one-time concessions, Taiwan put legal and procedural safeguards in place. Financing was phased instead of paid up front. Contracts tied each stage of a new fab to regulatory approvals and milestones, and state banks monitored how much capital could leave and under what conditions. This shifted negotiations away from a simple yes or no ultimatum into a structured timetable with limits, categories, and review points. Washington wanted a single dramatic concession. Taipei turns it into a series of controlled, reversible steps. Between July and September, the debate shifts onto the global stage. U.S. officials point to investment pledges worth trillions from allied countries as evidence that America is driving a new wave of industrial growth. Their message is straightforward. Tariffs are achieving their purpose. Money is flowing back into the United States, supply chains are being redirected, and international companies are committing to build factories on American soil. Taiwan responds with a more measured but decisive message. Government officials emphasize sovereignty and control, making clear that every major agreement includes governance rights, veto powers, and benefits that flow back to the domestic economy. TSMC's U.S. factories are presented as diversification of production, not a relocation of Taiwan's core industry, an approach to manage risk rather than to give up control. Analysts caution that semiconductors have now become the central bargaining tool in U.S.-Taiwan relations, and that any mistake could disrupt supply chains, increase costs, and unsettle markets well beyond the Taiwan Strait. Put simply, here's the map of power on the table. Washington's leverage points are clear. First, tariffs as pressure. Threaten chip duties up to 300% with carve-outs for those who build on U.S. soil. Second, security guarantees. Remind Taiwan that its survival depends on American weapons, intelligence, and diplomatic backing. Third, defense sales linkage. Quietly tie advanced systems, from air defense to fighter jets, into the broader bargain over chips and tariffs. Fourth, headline framing. Present every pledge, every factory announcement, as proof that the United States is forcing tribute out of allies. Taipei's counter-moves are just as clear. It flatly rejects the 50% relocation frame, refusing to define its survival as a quota. It practices selective cooperation. It expands fabrications in Arizona and deepens ties to U.S. industry. At the same time, it keeps the bulk of production and the most advanced technology at home. It deploys legal and procedural friction, turning blunt ultimatums into multi-year timetables with phased financing, state oversight, and built-in veto points. It uses strategic messaging, insisting negotiations are bilateral and sovereign, not coordinated in some U.S.-designed regional package. And it treats risk management as power, spreading investments over years, tying commitments to approvals, and ensuring that any threat becomes a schedule, not a surrender. For the United States, the strategic goal is straightforward. Reduce reliance on Taiwan's chip ecosystem for both military supply chains and economic resilience. For Taiwan, the stakes are existential. Chips are its crown jewel and its shield. Move too much production away, and you weaken the island's economic leverage and strategic importance at the exact moment it can least afford it. For global markets, tariff threats and relocation ultimatums risk costly disruptions. In everything from AI training to car manufacturing. This is where the liberation lens perspective comes in. On the surface, this looks like a story about tariffs and factory locations. Underneath, it's a stress test of a much older mindset, the master-slave framework in economic policy. The logic of that framework is simple. Issue an ultimatum. Tie it to protection. Wrap it in patriotic numbers and expect smaller states to comply. But the world is no longer populated by obedient clients. It's populated by sovereign strategists. Taiwan doesn't just negotiate, it reshapes the rules of the negotiation itself. Its guiding principle is simple. Cooperate where possible, but never give up control of its core advantages. Japan applies the same logic through its state bank financing. South Korea uses phased payment structures to limit exposure. Saudi Arabia insists on joint management and nuclear safeguards. In each case, Trump's bullying strategies run into governments that have learned to convert raw demands into bargaining leverage. That's the real lesson of this semiconductor standoff. The master's whip still hurts, but every swing teaches others how to grab the handle. Out of this, a new 3-rule playbook emerges. Rule 1. Never accept the master's frame. If the question is, how much of your capacity will you move? The first answer is not a number. It's, why is relocation the premise at all? Rule 2. Weaponize friction. Bullies want simple choices. Yes or no, ally or enemy. States that survive turn those choices into procedures. Law, approvals, timelines, conditions. Every extra step is one more way to dilute and reshape the demand. Rule 3. Trade headlines for levers. Give them the big number and the ribbon cutting for the cameras. Keep control over the technology, the governance, and the pace. Let them win the news cycle. You win the decade. In the end, Washington secures visible outcomes. Construction projects in Arizona, investment numbers for speeches, and tariffs that appear strong. Taiwan secures something less obvious but far more critical. Its semiconductor ecosystem remains intact, its most advanced production stays at home, and its sovereignty is reinforced through legal and structural safeguards rather than rhetoric. The United States gains a measure of protection against future crises. Taiwan maintains the semiconductor advantage, the silicon shield, that ensures the world pays close attention to its security and survival. In the meantime, global markets brace for higher costs and shifting supply chains as chips become the central token of geopolitical bargaining. Trump's strategy was to restore a world where Washington commands and others obey. Instead, it has trained a generation of governments in how to turn coercion into negotiation, and negotiation into leverage. If you want to keep seeing the architecture behind these kinds of stories, not just who shouts the biggest numbers, but who quietly holds the switches, subscribe.
This is Liberation Lens.
And perspective has never mattered more. But I leave you with the following bonus. Listen.
I want to talk about everything, but let's start specifically, Justin. 300%? What do you make of this?
It's bananas, it's berserk, and it's a little bit crazy all at once. The funny thing was, I thought he'd already announced he was going to put 100% tariff on semiconductors. And the interview I saw, he said, well, maybe 200 or 300%. Now, I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound like a serious considered policy process to me. The other thing is, last time Trump tried tariffs, he realized if we all ended up paying more for our laptops and our cell phones, that we'd be very upset. So in fact, he has a carve out for computers and smartphones. And so the implication is that if you bring across a semiconductor inside a computer, it'll get no tariff. But if you pluck it out of the computer, it'll get 300%. None of this makes sense, Steph.